October 26, 2023, did medieval queens really poison their enemies with secret potions brewed in the dead of night? Were some of them actually witches whispering dark spells from their castle towers? What if the stories you thought were just fairy tales about powerful women held a shadowy kernel of truth, twisting history into something wild and unforgettable? Number 11. Emma of Normandy. The Iron Lady's ordeal. The early medieval period was a brutal time, and even a queen had to fight for her survival, often against her own family. Emma of Normandy, a woman who married 2 kings of England and was mother to 2 others, faced more political intrigue than most. Born around 988, she was married first to Ethelred the Unready, then to Canute the Great, and saw her children ascend to thrones. But it was in her later years, during the turbulent succession after Canute's death, in 1035, that a truly wild story emerged, one that painted her as a conniving plotter and tested her very innocence through a fiery trial. The legend claims that in 1043, Emma, by then a formidable dowager queen, was accused of conspiring with the Bishop of Winchester, Stigand, against her own son, Edward the Confessor, who had finally taken the throne. Some whispers even suggested an unholy, secret relationship between the Queen Mother and the bishop. These were grave charges, especially for a woman of her stature, potentially treasonous and certainly scandalous. But how do you prove or disprove such accusations in an age when legal systems were still very much evolving and divine judgment was often sought? The answer, according to popular medieval chronicles like the Liber Eliensis, and even later accounts that embroidered the tale, was a trial by ordeal. Not just any ordeal, but one of the most terrifying: the ordeal of the hot ploughshares. The story goes that Emma demanded, or perhaps was compelled to accept, this brutal test to clear her name. The setting was the cathedral at Winchester, a grand and sacred space. 9 red-hot ploughshares were laid out on the floor, spaced evenly apart, forming a perilous path. For Emma, to prove her innocence, she had to walk barefoot over every single one of them. Imagine the scene: the hushed crowd, the flickering torchlight, the oppressive heat radiating from the glowing iron. Emma, a woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of Anglo-Saxon and Danish courts, now faced a test that combined faith and sheer physical endurance. The chroniclers recount that she prayed fervently, calling upon God and St. Swithin, a patron saint of Winchester, to guide her. Some versions of the tale say she walked across the burning metal without feeling the heat, without a single burn, even without knowing she was stepping on the hot iron, lost in her prayers. She was said to have only realized the miracle after she had passed the last plowshare, when the bishop, weeping, showed her her untouched feet. This miraculous passage was taken as undeniable proof of her innocence, a direct sign of God's favor. The legend served multiple purposes. For one, it vindicated Emma, solidifying her piety and devotion in the face of slander. For another, it enhanced the prestige of Winchester Cathedral and its patron saint, St. Swithin, as a place where divine justice could be manifested. While historians acknowledge the accusations against Emma and her strained relationship with Edward the Confessor, the ordeal of the hot ploughshares is widely considered a later embellishment, a myth that grew out of the need to tell a compelling story of the powerful woman's ultimate vindication. 11th century documents and more sober historical accounts from Emma's lifetime do not mention this dramatic event, suggesting it was added to the narrative much later to inject a sense of dramatic, divine intervention. Yet the sheer endurance of this tale through centuries speaks volumes about how compelling it was to medieval audiences, transforming a shrewd political operator into a saintly figure, miraculously spared by God. Number 10. Philippa of Hainault. The Tears of a Queen and the Saved Burghers. Philippa of Hainault, Queen of England as the wife of Edward III, is often remembered as a compassionate and beloved figure, a stark contrast to some of the more ruthless queens of her era. Born around 1314, she played a significant, if often understated, role in shaping the English court and its international relations. But among the many stories that paint her as a benevolent queen, one legend stands out. A tale that highlights her legendary compassion and is recounted with such vivid detail that it almost feels too dramatic to be true. This is the story of the burghers of Calais, a pivotal moment during the 100 Years' War, where Philippa's tears are said to have saved 6 condemned men from the gallows. The year was 1347. The siege of Calais had dragged on for nearly a year, a grueling blockade that had brought the French port city to its knees. Edward III, exasperated by the stubborn resistance and the immense cost of the siege, was furious. When the starving citizens finally surrendered, Edward reported they demanded a harsh price for their defiance. 6 of the most prominent citizens, the burghers, were to come to him barefoot, wearing only sackcloth, with ropes around their necks, carrying the keys to the city. They were to be executed as an example to all who dared defy the English crown. This was a grim, brutal expectation, a common tactic in medieval warfare to break the spirit of resistance and punish those who held out. The scene described by chroniclers like Jean Froissart, whose chronicles are a rich source of medieval history, though sometimes embellished, paints a powerful picture. The 6 burghers, including Eustache de Saint-Pierre, a wealthy and respected merchant, emerged from the besieged city, their faces gaunt, their bodies weak from starvation. They walked towards the English camp, prepared to sacrifice themselves for their fellow citizens. Edward III, surrounded by his knights and lords, was reportedly unmoved by their plight, determined to carry out his grim sentence. The gallows were prepared, the ropes hung, and the air was thick with tension and the stench of impending death. It was at this critical juncture, according to Froissart's famous account, that Queen Philippa, who had accompanied her husband on campaign and was reportedly pregnant at the time, intervened. She fell to her knees before her husband, her face streaked with tears, and pleaded for the lives of the 6 men. Her voice choked with emotion, implored him to show mercy, reminding him of their shared love and the sacredness of life, especially for those who had so bravely offered themselves up. She argued that executing these men would be a stain on his honor and a cruel act that would be remembered for centuries. Edward, known for his strong will and fierce determination, was initially unyielding. He resisted her pleas, reiterating his determination to punish the defiant city. But Philippa persisted, her tears flowing freely, her appeals growing more impassioned. Chronicler vividly describes her emotional display, how she clung to her husband, her lamentations echoing through the camp. Finally, overwhelmed by her genuine distress and the sheer power of her love for him, Edward relented. He reportedly declared that he could not refuse his pregnant queen, especially when she made such a request on bended knee. He ordered the ropes removed and the men pardoned, turning a moment of brutal vengeance into one of extraordinary mercy. This powerful narrative, depicted in countless artworks and celebrated in historical accounts, became a cornerstone of Philippa's legacy. While historians acknowledge the Siege of Calais and the general outline of the surrender, the dramatic intervention of Philippa is often seen as a highly romanticized version of events. Froissart, writing several decades after the fact, was known for his narrative flair and for portraying chivalry in its most idealized form. Some scholars suggest that the decision to spare the burghers might have been a more pragmatic one on Edward's part, realizing that such an extreme act of cruelty might provoke further resentment and rebellion rather than submission. Others believe that Philippa did indeed play a role in softening his resolve, though perhaps not in such a theatrical, tearful display. Regardless of the exact truth, the legend of Philippa of Hainault, the compassionate queen whose tears saved lives, remains a potent symbol of mercy. Comme it resonates because it speaks to a universal desire for justice tempered by humanity. Number 9. Blanche of Castile, the Dragon Queen's Iron Will. Blanche of Castile, born around 1188, was a queen of France, wife of Louis VIII, and most famously a fierce and effective regent for her young son, Louis IX, later Saint Louis. Her regency from 1226 to 1234 was marked by intense political turmoil, rebellions from powerful French barons, and the ongoing Albigensian Crusade in the south. While she was undoubtedly a devout and intelligent woman, the legends surrounding Blanche often paint her as a formidable, almost dragon-like figure, a woman of unyielding will and cunning, who ruthlessly crushed her enemies and manipulated her way to power, far beyond the typical scope of a medieval queen. One of the most enduring myths about Blanche revolves around her alleged affair with Cardinal Romano Frangipani, the papal legate sent to France in 1229. During her regency, Blanche faced a continuous struggle against rebellious barons who saw her as a foreign woman. She was Spanish by birth, and a weak link they could exploit. Powerful noble families, including the Counts of Brittany and Champagne, constantly challenged her authority. To consolidate her position and maintain control, Blanche needed every ally she could find, and the support of the papacy was crucial. Cardinal Romano, a shrewd diplomat, became a key figure in navigating these treacherous political waters. The whispers and rumors started because of their close working relationship. Blanche and Romano were constantly together, strategizing, negotiating, and making decisions that shaped the future of France. Their closeness, combined with the fact that Blanche was a widow and Romano a powerful, unmarried churchman, fueled the gossip mills of the medieval court. The barons, keen to discredit her and undermine her authority, actively spread malicious stories suggesting that their alliance went beyond mere politics, implying a scandalous secret relationship. They painted Blanche as a woman who used her charm and perhaps even her body to secure her power, rather than her intellect or political acumen. This was a classic tactic to undermine female authority in a patriarchal society. The legend implies that Blanche, known for her sharp intellect and strategic mind, was not above using her femininity to gain an advantage. Accounts, even those from her time that lean towards the negative, emphasize her beauty and captivating presence. It was said that she could charm anyone, even the most recalcitrant of her opponents. While there's no historical evidence whatsoever to suggest an actual affair between Blanche and Cardinal Romano, their relationship appears to have been strictly political and professional. The myth persisted because it fit into a common medieval trope: the powerful woman whose influence was attributed to illicit means rather than genuine ability. It was easier for some to believe she seduced her way to power than to admit she was simply smarter and more capable than many of the men around her. Another facet of Blanche's Dragon Queen persona comes from her relentless pursuit of order and her crushing of rebellious barons. She personally led armies, negotiated treaties, and displayed an iron will that surprised and often intimidated her opponents. For instance, in 1228, when the barons openly rebelled, she marched against them with her son Louis IX at her side. One popular story recounted by contemporary chroniclers like Matthew Paris, though not always sympathetically, describes how she skillfully outmaneuvered the rebellious lords, often using swift, decisive action. On one occasion during a journey with her young son, they were ambushed by rebels. Rather than fleeing, Blanche bravely rallied her small escort, and her unwavering courage reputedly caused the rebels to hesitate, allowing her and Louis to escape or negotiate a safer passage. Her determination to secure her son's throne and maintain royal authority led to accusations of being overly ambitious, even tyrannical. Her contemporaries, especially those on the losing side of her political battles, painted her as a woman who was too dominant, too controlling. She was not afraid to impose harsh sentences or use military force to achieve her aims, which contributed to her fearsome reputation. The myth of the Dragon Queen is therefore not about a literal dragon, but about a woman with a ferocious will, an unyielding grip on power, and a reputation for being formidable to the point of being intimidating. It's a testament to her political strength that even her enemies acknowledged her power, albeit through the lens of fearful rumor and thinly veiled misogyny. She was a queen who refused to be pushed aside, and her story, even with its mythical embellishments, reflects the immense challenges and the extraordinary capabilities of women who dared to wield power. Number 8. Margaret of Anjou, the she-wolf of France. Margaret of Anjou, Queen of England, as the wife of Henry VI, is one of the most compelling and controversial figures of the Wars of the Roses. Born in 1430, she was a French princess who became the driving force behind the Lancastrian cause, fiercely defending her husband's crumbling throne and her son's right to succeed. Her story is one of tragedy, ambition, and relentless struggle, but it's often overshadowed by the chilling nickname she earned from her enemies, the She-Wolf of France. This title, steeped in medieval prejudice against powerful women, transformed her into a monstrous figure, a ruthless and unnatural woman whose ferocity was deemed unwomanly and therefore inherently evil. The legend of the she-wolf stems from Margaret's unprecedented role as a de facto ruler during her husband's periods of mental incapacitation. Henry VI was a gentle, pious, but largely ineffectual king who suffered from debilitating bouts of mental illness, leaving the kingdom vulnerable. In his stead, Margaret stepped up, taking charge of government, leading armies, and making critical political decisions. This was highly unusual for a queen in England, where queens consort traditionally played more supportive background role. Her active participation in politics, particularly her determined opposition to the powerful House of York, led her enemies to brand her as an aggressive, unfeminine usurper of male authority. One of the most persistent myths surrounding Margaret is her alleged affair with Edmund Beaufort, Duke of Somerset. Somerset was a prominent Lancastrian commander and a close ally of the Queen. The rumors of an affair were spread by the Yorkists, particularly Richard, Duke of York, to discredit Margaret and cast doubt on the legitimacy of her son, Prince Edward. If Prince Edward was not Henry VI's son but Somerset's, then the Yorkist claim to the throne based on Henry's perceived illegitimacy would be strengthened. This was a common and effective smear tactic in medieval power struggles designed to destabilize the opposing dynasty by questioning the purity of its lineage. Chroniclers on the Yorkist side, often biased in their accounts, would hint at or explicitly state this scandalous relationship. For instance, the Paston letters, while not directly confirming an affair, reflect the widespread gossip and concern among the nobility about Margaret's perceived over-reliance on Somerset. The fact that Margaret vigorously supported Somerset even when his military campaigns were unsuccessful further fueled the suspicion. The myth portrays Margaret as a woman driven not by loyalty to her husband or son, but by illicit passion, suggesting her political decisions were clouded by personal favoritism rather than sound judgment. This narrative stripped her of her intelligence and strategic acumen, reducing her actions to the base motivations of a she-wolf. The she-wolf moniker itself was probably a direct reference to Isabella of France, the wife of Edward II, who was famously called the she-wolf of France for her ruthless overthrow and alleged murder of her husband. By associating Margaret with Isabella, her enemies aimed to paint her as equally treacherous, unnatural, and dangerous. Margaret's perceived ruthlessness, her willingness to engage in brutal warfare, and her determination to fight for her son's inheritance contributed to this fearsome image. She was present on battlefields, rallied her troops, and showed no hesitation in ordering executions or reprisals against her enemies. Actions considered highly unladylike for a queen. For example, after the Lancastrian victory at the Second Battle of St. Albans in 1461, Margaret's army, a largely northern force, marched south towards London. They were accused of widespread looting and destruction, earning the deep fear and resentment of the capital. While the extent of her direct control over these actions is debatable, medieval armies especially those made up of disparate patriots. This further cemented her image as a destructive, almost savage force, a she-wolf, leading her pack to ravage the land. Ultimately, the legend of Margaret as the she-wolf of France is a powerful example of how a woman's ambition and strength were demonized in a patriarchal society. She was a formidable political and military leader who defied traditional gender roles, and in response, her enemies created a monstrous caricature of her. While she undoubtedly made harsh decisions in a brutal civil war, the she-wolf myth stripped her of her human complexity, her motivations, and to a symbol of unchecked, dangerous female power. It's a story that continues to fascinate, revealing as much about medieval anxieties surrounding powerful women as it does about Margaret herself. Number 7. Isabella of Castile, the fanatic queen and the Dark Inquisition. Isabella, the First of Castile, born in 1451, was a monarch of immense power and influence, whose reign alongside her husband, Ferdinand II of Aragon, fundamentally reshaped Spain and set the stage for its global empire. She is celebrated by many for her intelligence, piety, and strategic vision, including her role in the Reconquista and the sponsorship of Christopher Columbus's voyages. However, Isabella's legacy is also deeply intertwined with darker legends, particularly those that paint her as a fanatical religious zealot, the driving force behind the Spanish Inquisition, and a ruthless persecutor of non-Christians. These myths often exaggerate her personal involvement and intent, transforming her into a cold, unyielding figure obsessed with religious uniformity at any cost. One of the most persistent myths is that Isabella herself was the primary architect and instigator of the Spanish Inquisition. While she and Ferdinand did indeed petition Pope Sixtus IV to establish the Inquisition in Castile in 1478, the legend often depicts her as a singularly zealous and cruel figuro puris. The myth suggests she was consumed by a desire to purify Spain through fire and torture, making her personally responsible for every accusation, every auto de fe, and every execution. The reality, as historians explain, is more complex. The Inquisition was established primarily to ensure the sincerity of conversions, particularly among conversos who were suspected of secretly practicing Judaism. There was genuine concern among some religious leaders and the monarchs about false Christians undermining the purity of the Catholic faith and potentially creating social unrest. Isabella, being a deeply religious monarch, certainly believed in the importance of Catholic unity for her kingdom. However, the decision to establish the Inquisition was a political and religious one, influenced by various advisors, the papacy, and the broader social and religious climate of the time. It was not solely the product of one woman's fanaticism. The legend often ignores the initial resistance Isabella showed to some of the Inquisition's more extreme measures. Early in its operation, the Inquisition's harshness led to appeals and complaints. Isabella, along with Ferdinand, even sent their own representatives to investigate abuses. While they did not abolish the institution, their early actions suggest a degree of concern, even if it eventually yielded to the Inquisition's relentless grip. The myth, however, strips away this nuance, presenting Isabella as a monolithic force of religious intolerance. Another prominent myth connected to Isabella is her supposed personal responsibility for the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. In 1492, the Edict of Expulsion, signed by both Isabella and Ferdinand, forced hundreds of thousands of Jews to either convert to Catholicism or leave the kingdom. The legend attributes this decision almost entirely to Isabella's unshakable religious conviction, portraying her as the unyielding monarch who would tolerate no religious diversity. This narrative often highlights the immense suffering caused by the expulsion, placing the full weight of that historical tragedy directly on her shoulders. While Isabella's piety was undoubtedly a significant factor, the decision to expel the Jews was also influenced by economic, social, and political consideration. There were arguments that the presence of unconverted Jews threatened the religious uniformity of the kingdom and provided an example for conversos to lapse back into Judaism. Furthermore, the crown stood to gain financially from the confiscated property of expelled Jews. The legend, however, simplifies this complex decision, reducing it to a personal, fanatical crusade orchestrated solely by Isabella. It removed the agency of Ferdinand, who was an equally powerful and religiously devout monarch, and the broader context of medieval anti-Semitism and the drive for national religious unity across Europe. The image of Isabella as the fanatic queen also extends to her role in the conquest of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Spain. She is often depicted as a crusader queen, personally driven by a holy war against Islam, determined to eradicate all traces of Moorish presence from the Iberian Peninsula. While she was indeed a fervent supporter of the Reconquista and saw it as a divine mission, the myth often overlooks the pragmatic aspects of the conquest and the initial promises of religious tolerance to the defeated Muslims, promises that were later broken, but not necessarily solely at Isabella's immediate insistence. These legends, while containing kernels of truth about Isabella's deep faith and her role in pivotal historical events, ultimately distort her character by emphasizing a singular unwavering fanaticism. They transform her into a symbol of religious intolerance rather than a complex political figure operating within the brutal and religiously charged context of late medieval Europe. The enduring power of these myths lies in their ability to simplify a multifaceted historical figure into a stark, morally unambiguous caricature, serving both as a warning against religious extremism and a powerful, if flawed, narrative of queenly power. Number 6. Mary, Queen of Scots. The Alluring Serpent and the Conspiracy. Mary, Queen of Scots, born in 1542, lived a life so filled with drama, intrigue, and tragedy that it reads like a Shakespearean play. Crowned Queen of Scotland as an infant Queen of France for a brief period and a claimant to the English throne, Mary was a figure of immense political and religious significance in 16th century Europe. Her story is a swirling vortex of love affairs, betrayals, and accusations that culminated in her execution. Among the many legends that cling to her, two stand out: her alleged direct involvement in the murder of her second husband, Lord Darnley, and her bewitching, yet politically naive, allure that supposedly led her to ruin. These myths paint her as either a cunning, murderous femme fatale or a beautiful, tragic victim of circumstance. The most infamous legend is the casket letters conspiracy and her supposed role in Darnley's murder. On February 10, 1567, Kirkhoe Field, the house where Darnley was recuperating from illness, exploded, and Darnley's body was found in the garden, apparently strangled. Prime suspect quickly became James Hepburn, 4th Earl of Bothwell, a powerful Scottish nobleman who swiftly married Mary just 3 months after Darnley's death. This hasty marriage, along with the discovery of a series of letters and sonnets, the casket letters, allegedly written by Mary to Bothwell, formed the basis of the charge that Mary was complicit in her husband's murder, actively plotting with Bothwell to eliminate him. The casket letters were purportedly found in a silver casket belonging to Bothwell. They contained passionate declarations of love, discussions of Darnley's impending doom, and Mary's apparent contempt for him. These letters were used as crucial evidence by the Scottish Protestant lords, known as the Confederate lords, who rebelled against Mary, imprisoned her, and forced her abdication. Later, during investigations and trials held in England at the behest of Elizabeth I, these letters were presented as undeniable proof of Mary's guilt. The myth asserts that Mary was not just passively aware of the plot, but an active, cold-blooded participant, driven by her infatuation with Bothwell and her desire to rid herself of a troublesome husband. However, the authenticity of the casket letters has been debated for centuries. Critics argue that they could have been forged, altered, or skillfully interpolated by Mary's enemies to incriminate her. Mary herself consistently denied their authenticity and claimed they were fabrications designed to ruin her reputation and justify her overthrow. Historians point to inconsistencies in the handwriting, language, and dating of the letters. The fact that the originals disappeared and only copies or translations exist further fuels the suspicion of forgery. Despite the historical doubts, the legend of Mary as a murderess, deeply implicated in the death of her husband through these damning letters, remains a powerful and captivating part of her story, portraying her as a dark figure capable of ruthless action for love and power. Another pervasive myth about Mary is her bewitching beauty and charm, which ironically is often presented as both her greatest asset and her ultimate downfall. From a young age, Mary was celebrated for her striking appearance, her grace, and her captivating personality. She was educated in France and possessed all the accomplishments of a Renaissance queen. The legend suggests that her beauty and allure were so potent that they led men to foolish decisions and her to political ruin. She was portrayed as a woman who captivated men and was, in turn, captivated by them, making decisions based on passion rather than political expediency. This myth is often linked to her various marriages and alleged love affairs. Her marriage to Darnley, a handsome but arrogant and unstable cousin, was seen as a romantic but ultimately disastrous choice. Her rapid marriage to Bothwell, a man widely suspected of Darnley's murder, cemented this image of a queen driven by an irresistible, dangerous passion. The myth implies that her judgment was clouded by her heart, making her vulnerable to manipulation by ambitious men. Even her prolonged captivity in England under Elizabeth I is sometimes framed through this lens, with the legend suggesting that Elizabeth was deeply jealous of Mary's beauty and charisma, seeing her as a dangerous rival, not just for the throne, but also for male attention. Yet, this bewitching, naive myth often underplays Mary's intelligence, her political skill, and her genuine ambition. While she made questionable decisions, particularly her marriage to Bothwell, these choices were often made in a desperate attempt to secure her position and her son's inheritance in a treacherous political landscape. The narrative of the lovesick, easily manipulated queen strips away her agency and portrays her as merely a pawn of her emotions or the machinations of others. The legend of Mary, Queen of Scots, as both an alluring serpent and a tragic, naive beauty, continues to be a fertile ground for historical interpretation, revealing how powerful women are often reduced to simplistic, often contradictory. Number 5. Joanna of Castile, the Mad Queen and her undying love. Joanna of Castile, born in 1479, daughter of the powerful Catholic monarchs Isabella I and Ferdinand II, was destined for a life of royal marriages and political significance. However, her life took a dark turn, leading to her infamous nickname, Joanna the Mad. While her mental health was undeniably fragile, the legends surrounding Joanna often exaggerate her madness, transforming her into a tragic figure consumed by an all-consuming, macabre love for her deceased husband, Philip the Handsome. These myths, propagated by her father and later her son, served political purposes, justifying her lifelong confinement and stripping her of any legitimate claim to power. The central and most powerful myth of Joanna the Mad revolves around her obsessive, almost necrophilic devotion to her husband, Philip I of Castile. Philip the Handsome, Duke of Burgundy. Philip died suddenly in 1506 after only 8 years of marriage. He was young, handsome, and Medoc, and Joanna was deeply devoted to him. Despite his philandering, the legend claims that after his death, Joanna's grief turned into a profound madness. She refused to allow his coffin to be buried for months, insisting on keeping his embalmed body with her. She would reportedly open the coffin to gaze upon his face, kiss his decaying features, and generally treat him as if he were still alive. Chroniclers and later propagandists described her as dragging his coffin across Spain, moving from castle to castle allowing no woman near the casket, consumed by a jealous love that transcended death. It was said that she would stop the procession in remote villages, ensuring the coffin was placed near her bed at night, and that she would frequently check if he was still breathing, or at least still present. This macabre pilgrimage, lasting for months, became the defining image of her madness, proof positive that she was unfit to rule. The image of a deranged queen traveling with her dead husband is a powerful and unsettling one that has captured the imagination for centuries. While Joanna's grief was undoubtedly profound and expressed in ways that seemed unusual to her contemporaries, the extent of her madness and the theatricality of her coffin procession were likely exaggerated for political gain. Her father, Ferdinand, and later her son Charles V, both had strong motives to declare her incapacitated. Joanna was the legitimate heir to Castile, and her removal from power allowed Ferdinand to continue ruling, and later for Charles to consolidate his vast Habsburg inheritance without challenge. By portraying her as hopelessly insane, they justified her confinement in the castle of Tordesillas for over 46 years, effectively neutralizing her as a political threat. Historians suggest that Joanna suffered from depression, possibly exacerbated by multiple pregnancies, the loss of loved ones, and the political pressures she faced. Her emotional state was certainly fragile, but her madness was a convenient narrative for her male relatives. Her reluctance to allow Philip's body to be buried immediately might have stemmed from a desire to ensure his burial in Granada, a city of symbolic importance rather than sheer insanity. The journey itself was a long and arduous one, and the frequent stops and delays were not entirely out of the ordinary for royal processions of that era. The stories of her opening the coffin and kissing him were likely embellishments designed to shock and horrify, solidifying the image of a completely irrational queen. Another less sensational but equally a fatal myth relates to her general mental instability and her inability to govern. The legend suggests that Joanna was inherently erratic and incapable of making sound decisions, prone to outbursts and bouts of melancholia that rendered her entirely unfit for the throne. This narrative painted her as a weak-minded woman who was easily manipulated or simply too deranged to understand the complexities of statecraft. However, early in her reign before her husband's death, there is evidence that Joanna showed a keen interest in governance and even challenged her father's authority, indicating a political awareness that belies the later mad label. She was a cultured and intelligent woman, fluent in several languages and well-educated. Her defiance of Ferdinand and Charles, rather than being mere lunacy, could be interpreted as a struggle for her legitimate right to rule. Constant surveillance, isolation, and control she endured for nearly 5 decades, likely exacerbated any pre-existing mental health issues, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of her madness. The myth of Joanna the Mad serves as a stark reminder of how history can be shaped by those in power. By transforming her into a figure of tragic obsessive insanity, her father and son were able to control vast kingdoms and establish their own powerful legacies. Her story is a poignant exploration of love, grief, and the brutal political manipulation of a queen's mental state, leaving us to wonder how much of her madness was a genuine affliction and how much was a carefully constructed narrative designed to keep a legitimate queen off her throne. Number 4. Catherine de' Medici, the Black Queen, and her poison ring. Catherine de' Medici, born in 1519, was Queen of France as the wife of Henry II, and then for many years the powerful regent and queen mother to her sons. A Florentine by birth, she brought Italian Renaissance culture and sophistication to the French court, but she also arrived carrying the heavy baggage of rumor and suspicion. In an era rife with religious wars and political assassinations, Catherine became the focus of some of the darkest legends of the French monarchy, transforming her into a sinister figure. The Black Queen, a mistress of poison, black magic, and deadly intrigue. These myths painted her as a Machiavellian sorceress, responsible for countless deaths and conspiracies. The most infamous legend surrounding Catherine is her alleged mastery of poison. The story goes that she employed a personal perfumer named René, the Florentine, who was secretly a skilled poisoner. Through him, she supposedly had access to undetectable poisons which she would use to eliminate her enemies or rivals. The myth suggests that she might have used poison through various means. Poisoned gloves, poisoned books, even a poison ring with a hidden compartment that allowed her to deliver a fatal dose. With a handshake, every sudden death at court, especially among her opponents, was attributed to Catherine's dark arts. One particular event often cited in this legend is the mysterious death of Joan d'Albret, the staunchly Protestant Queen of Navarre and mother of Henry IV. Joan d'Albret died in Paris in 1572, shortly before the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where she had come to negotiate the marriage of her son to Catherine's daughter. Marguerite Protestant propagandists immediately claimed Catherine had poisoned her, perhaps using poisoned gloves. The myth implies that Catherine, seeing Jean as an obstacle to her Catholic agenda, resorted to secret murder. However, medical examination at the time suggested Joan d'Albret died of natural causes, possibly pleurisy, while the accusation of poisoning was convenient for Protestant factions seeking to demonize the Catholic Queen. There is no credible historical evidence to support Catherine's direct involvement in any poisonings. The reputation of Italians for being cunning and skilled in such dark arts, combined with Catherine's foreignness and her powerful political role, made her an easy target for such accusations. The very idea of an undetectable poison ring or poisoned object was a popular trope in Renaissance literature and imagination, making it easy to attribute to a powerful, feared woman. Another significant myth paints Catherine as a practitioner of black magic and astrology, relying on dark prophecies and arcane rituals to guide her reign. It was known that Catherine was interested in astrology and the occult, a common fascination among educated elites of her time. She famously consulted Nostradamus, the renowned astrologer and prophet, seeking his counsel on the future of her sons and the kingdom. This legitimate interest was twisted by her enemies into something far more sinister. The legend suggests that Catherine possessed dark grimoire, performed secret rituals, and used sorcery to influence events or to harm her adversaries. She was sometimes called Madame la Serpente, Madame the Serpent, or depicted as a witch, conjuring spells in her chambers. Her interest in architecture, gardens, and scientific instruments, combined with her foreign origins, made her appear mysterious and alien to many, feeding into the fear of the unknown. Her alleged use of a flying squadron of beautiful, intelligent ladies in waiting to gather intelligence and influence courtiers also added to her mystique, suggesting a network of manipulation. These myths about Catherine de' Medici were particularly potent during the French Wars of Religion. Protestant propagandists, desperate to discredit the Catholic monarchy, seized upon these rumors and exaggerated them, transforming Catherine into the ultimate symbol of Catholic evil and treachery. She was blamed for the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, where thousands of Protestants were slaughtered, despite the historical consensus that the massacre was a chaotic eruption of violence rather than a premeditated act solely orchestrated by Catherine. The legend, however, attributed the bloodshed directly to her ruthless and bloodthirsty nature, cementing her image as the Black Queen. The enduring power of these myths lies in their ability to simplify a complex political figure into a convenient villain. Catherine was indeed a formidable and ruthless politician, operating in an extraordinarily brutal era, but she was also a patron of the arts, a devoted mother, and a queen who fought desperately to preserve the Valois dynasty. The legends of her poisons and dark magic served to demonize her, stripping away her agency and portraying her as something monstrous rather than a powerful woman navigating a truly treacherous world. Her story remains a captivating exploration of how fear and prejudice can warp the legacy of even the most influential queens. Number 3. Eleanor of Aquitaine. The Devil's Brood in the Serpent's Embrace. Eleanor of Aquitaine, born around 1122, is arguably the most famous and powerful queen of the Middle Ages. Duchess in her own right, Queen of France and then Queen of England, she lived a life of unparalleled influence, political intrigue, and personal drama. Her story is so grand that it's no surprise legends sprang up around her like wildflowers. Two particularly vivid myths define aspects of her formidable reputation: the tale of her devil's brood children and the romanticized yet historically unsupported legend of her affair with Saladin during the Second Crusade. These myths portray her as a woman of immense power, perhaps even unnatural power, and captivating, dangerous allure. The Devil's Brood legend refers to Eleanor's children with her second husband, Henry II of England. Henry, a dynamic and often tyrannical king, was known for his explosive temper and restless energy. Eleanor, too, was a strong-willed, intelligent, and politically active woman. Their marriage, initially passionate, became a bitter struggle for power, culminating in Eleanor's long imprisonment. The children they produced, Henry the Young King, Richard the Lionheart, Geoffrey, and John, who would become King John, were known for their ambition, their frequent rebellions against their father, and their often ruthless pursuit of power. The legend states that such strong, rebellious, and formidable children could only have come from a lineage touched by the demonic. This myth, often propagated by chroniclers loyal to Henry II or later commentators, claimed that Eleanor and Henry were a devil's brood, meaning they themselves were descended from demonic forces, or at least possessed demonic qualities that they passed on to their children. The story was amplified by the widespread belief that red hair, a prominent feature in the Angevin family, Henry's dynasty, was a sign of a demonic lineage. The sheer ferocity of the family's internal feuds, sons constantly rebelling against their father, brother fighting brother, fed into this narrative. It was seen as an explanation for their extraordinary drive, their violent tempers, and their seeming disregard for traditional filial piety. The legend effectively took the very real, often brutal political realities of the Angevin court and gave them a supernatural, almost primal explanation. It was a way to make sense of a family that seemed to defy the norms of medieval kinship and family bonds, attributing their extraordinary power and discord to something beyond the human realm. Another captivating, though entirely mythical legend about Eleanor involves her alleged romantic entanglement with Saladin, the legendary Muslim sultan who was the most formidable opponent of the Crusaders in the Holy Land. The story claims that during the Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149, Eleanor, then Queen of France, and accompanying her first husband, Louis VII, to the Holy Land, somehow developed a passionate affair with Saladin. This myth portrays Eleanor as an irresistible beauty, so alluring that she could charm even the most implacable enemy of Christendom. Or perhaps a treacherous figure who would betray her husband and her faith. For love, this legend is completely without historical foundation. Eleanor and Saladin never met. Saladin was only a child during the Second Crusade, and he did not rise to prominence until much later, long after Eleanor had returned to Europe and become Queen of England. The myth likely emerged from a blend of factors: Eleanor's legendarity and charisma, her known Hindustan. It was a popular trope in medieval romance and later literature, the idea of a powerful, exotic queen falling for a heroic enemy leader. The story of Eleanor and Saladin served to highlight her perceived exoticism and dangerous sensuality, further cementing her image as a woman who defied conventional norms. She was a woman of immense power, who had 2 royal divorces, a rare and scandalous occurrence, led her own vassals to crusade, and actively participated in politics. These actions, unconventional for a woman of her time, were often seen as either extraordinary or scandalous, depending on the perspective. The myth of the affair with Saladin, though fantastical, played into this perception, reinforcing the idea of Eleanor as a woman of unchecked passions and desires, capable of charming anyone and disrupting the natural order. These legends, the Devil's Brood and the Serpent's Embrace of Saladin, reveal how medieval society grappled with a queen who defied traditional expectations. Eleanor was simply too powerful, too intelligent, too independent, and too long-lived not to have myths coalesce around her. Her agency and formidable presence were attributed to supernatural origins, or scandalous liaisons, transforming her into a figure both awe-inspiring and slightly terrifying. Number 2. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen and her secret love children. Elizabeth, the first born in 1533, was one of England's most iconic and enduring monarchs. Her long reign, known as the Elizabethan Age, was a period of relative stability, cultural flourishing, and growing national power. However, despite her public image as the strong, decisive Virgin Queen, Elizabeth was also the subject of numerous persistent legends that delved into her private life, particularly her love affairs and the tantalizing possibility of secret children. These myths challenged her, carefully constructed, transforming her into a figure of hidden desires, political machination, and scandalous secrets that, if true, would have rocked the very foundations of her reign. The most famous myth about Elizabeth I is that of the Virgin Queen. This was a carefully cultivated image symbolizing her dedication to her kingdom and her unwavering commitment to ruling without the distraction or political complications of a husband. She deliberately chose not to marry famously, declaring she was already bound unto a husband, which is the Kingdom of England. This became a cornerstone of her mystique and her authority, presenting her as a woman above earthly desires, married to her people. However, beneath this public facade, whispers and rumors constantly circulated about her alleged lovers and secret children. The most prominent figure in these legends was Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Dudley was Elizabeth's childhood friend, a close confidant, and widely believed to be the great love of her life. Their relationship was intensely close, and Dudley was a constant presence at court. The legend suggests that their relationship was far more than just platonic friendship, that they were secretly lovers and perhaps even secretly married. The myth claimed that Elizabeth, despite her public pronouncements, harbored a deep personal desire and was willing to compromise her virgin image for love. This myth goes further, alleging that Elizabeth and Dudley had illegitimate children together, kept hidden from the public eye to preserve the Queen's image and the stability of the succession. One common version of this myth tells of a son born in secret spirited, away to be raised elsewhere. This clandestine child would, according to the legend, represent a direct threat to the established line of succession, a potentially explosive secret that could unravel her carefully crafted reign. These stories often surfaced from political opponents or rival claimants to the throne, eager to discredit Elizabeth and undermine her legitimacy. While there is no historical evidence whatsoever to support the existence of any children born to Elizabeth, the persistent nature of this legend speaks to the deep fascination and to close relationship with Dudley. Another variant of the secret children myth suggests that Elizabeth did not die a virgin, but rather that she was physically incapable of having children due to a mysterious ailment, or perhaps even that she had a secret medical condition that prevented her from ever consummating a marriage. This particular myth served to explain her perpetual virginity, offering a biological reason rather than a political choice. It subtly undermined her chosen image, suggesting she was not a virgin queen by will, but by circumstance, and that her personal life was not truly under her control. Beyond Dudley, Elizabeth was also linked to other alleged affairs and secret liaisons. These stories often painted her as a fiery, passionate woman, capable of deep affection and even reckless behavior in her private life. A stark contrast to her calculated public persona, the myth of her various suitors, from European princes to English noblemen, often included the idea that she toyed with them, keeping them on a string for political advantage while secretly indulging her own desires with a chosen few. This portrayed her as a clever manipulator of hearts, both for love and for statecraft. The legends surrounding Elizabeth I's virginity, her love life, and her alleged secret children are powerful, because they delve into the very human desire to know the real person behind the public figure. In Elizabeth's case, her deliberate choice of virginity for political reasons created a vacuum that rumor and myth were eager to fill. These stories reflect contemporary anxieties about female power, succession, and the inherent vulnerability of a monarchy without a clear male heir. They transformed the formidable Virgin Queen into a figure of tantalizing secrets, making her reign even more dramatic and captivating, a testament to the enduring power of whispers and speculation in shaping history. Number 1. Eleanor of Aquitaine, the accused poisoner of Fair Rosamond. Eleanor of Aquitaine returns to our list, not just because of her long and eventful life, but because she is the subject of another, incredibly vivid and enduring legend, one that paints her as a jealous and ruthless queen, capable of the darkest deeds. This is the tale of Eleanor's alleged murder of Fair Rosamond Clifford, her husband, King Henry II's beautiful mistress, a story so popular it became a staple of ballads, plays, and even children's stories. It transforms a powerful queen into a vengeful villainess, driven by passionate jealousy and a thirst for blood. The legend claims that King Henry II, known for his numerous affairs, had a particularly deep and enduring love for Rosamond Clifford. She was renowned for her extraordinary beauty, so much so that she was called Fair Rosamond. Keep her secret and safe from Eleanor's legendary temper, Henry supposedly built a cunning labyrinth at his hunting lodge in Woodstock, Oxfordshire, or some secret bower within which Rosamond was hidden. This labyrinth was so intricate that only Henry himself or a select few who knew the secret could navigate it, ensuring that Rosamond was protected from the Queen's wrath. However, the myth asserts that Eleanor, with her formidable intelligence and cunning, eventually uncovered the secret. The legend varies in how she achieved this. Some versions say she followed a silken thread that Henry inadvertently left trailing from the labyrinth. Others claim she bribed one of Henry's trusted servants. Once she found Rosamond's hidden retreat, Eleanor, fueled by jealousy and rage, confronted her rival. The confrontation, according to the legend, was brutal. Eleanor offered Rosamond a stark choice: a dagger or a cup of poison. Rosamond, faced with this horrific ultimatum, chose the poison and died shortly after, a victim of the Queen's cruel vengeance. This dramatic tale, filled with elements of romance, betrayal, and dark justice, first gained widespread popularity in the 14th century, long after Eleanor and Rosamond had died. Early chroniclers, like Ralph Higden in his Polychronicon, mention Rosamond as Henry's mistress and her death, but they do not attribute it to Eleanor's direct action. The story of the labyrinth, the silken thread, and the poisoned chalice or dagger seems to have been added and embellished over time, becoming an integral part of the legend. It was a story that audiences loved because it pitted a powerful, vengeful queen against a beautiful, innocent victim, highlighting the dangerous passions that could erupt within the royal court. The historical facts paint a different picture. Rosamond Clifford was indeed one of Henry II's mistresses, and she bore him at least 2 illegitimate sons. She died around 1176, several years before Eleanor was released from her long imprisonment by Henry. Eleanor was confined from 1173 until Henry's death in 1189, her sons' rebellion against their father. Therefore, it would have been physically impossible for Eleanor to have confronted or poisoned Rosamond, as she was under strict guard and isolated during the period of Rosamond's death. Rosamund likely died of natural causes, perhaps an illness common to the time. Despite the clear historical inaccuracies, the legend of Eleanor and Rosamund persisted and thrived. It became a powerful allegory for the dangers of illicit love and the lengths to which a wronged queen might go to protect her honor and position. It also served to sensationalize Eleanor's character, transforming her from a complex political figure into a stock villainess in a dramatic narrative. Her already fearsome reputation for intelligence, strength, and defiance lent itself perfectly to the role of the ruthless, jealous queen. The legend capitalizes on the idea that powerful women, particularly those who defy traditional norms, are capable of extreme cruelty. The story of fair Rosamund's murder at the hands of Eleanor of Aquitaine remains one of the most enduring myths of the medieval period, a testament to the power of a captivating narrative over cold historical fact. It shows how the public imagination can take kernels of truth, a powerful queen, a philandering king, a beautiful mistress, and weave them into a gripping, morally charged tale that continues to fascinate and shape our understanding of these legendary figures.